morning or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're from. I'm going to talk a little bit about the updates to BehavePlus to version 6. This is the first major update we've had since 2009, and I've been actively working on it for the last 4 years. So I'm glad to finally get it out and into your hands so that you can let me go. Let me know what changes need to be made before we go official with this in about 8 or 9 months. So currently I'm a contractor at the Fire Lab. My term position ended and they brought me back as a development lead for BehavePlus. And then I'm also helping with the NFDRS 2016 rollout. But the objectives of today's webinar are to let you know the status of BehavePlus and what's going on, what all the changes are. Just show you a bit about our website, and then demonstrate some of the major changes in BehavePlus. I'm not going to go through all the changes in either site, but we'll be able to see the major ones. So version 6 became available in January, and I first introduced it at a workshop in West Virginia at the very beginning of January of this year, and that's pretty much the only place besides you guys that have heard about it yet, other than the email blast that I sent out. Our website is on Frames. If you go to frames.gov/BehavePlus, you're more than lots of information on there for you to see. And all of our help files within Behave have been updated for version 6. So if you see any problems there, definitely let me know. So the first thing I have is a question to find out if you have used BehavePlus version 6 yet. So it looks like a few of you have. That's a good thing, because I haven't heard from you yet, so that means we haven't broken it just yet, and that's always good. But most of you haven't, so this will be a good introduction to what we've done here. One of the things I wanted to mention before we get started is the user's guide is no longer going to be updated with BehavePlus. We've replaced it with a features paper. It describes more generally what and why you might want to do something, and it's a bit more reader-friendly than a user's guide. So we're not going to update the user's guide, but all of that information will be found in the features paper, which should come out hopefully by the end of the year. And now to the changes. A lot of these changes came about because I do teach S490 and I get a number of questions from the field. And then there are things that have that I make mistakes on when I use this. So I wanted to bring those up. The first one is the relative humidity tool. The standalone tool was the only one that did not have a calculate button. And so you had to tab out of the last box if you typed in the site elevation or changed the temperature. And if you didn't tab out of it, the relative humidity did not change. That confounded a number of S490 students, and I didn't really think that was fair to them. So I added a calculate button that would help all of us remember that we need to do that. We've restructured the Surface module. This is the module that had the most changes in it. It's also the most complex module in the system. So to make things a little easier, I set up 2 different tabs. You now have the inputs on one tab and the outputs on another tab. It's going to default to the output variables to the basic tab, which is the first place a lot of people start. But hopefully this will clear up. Am I looking at inputs? Am I looking at outputs? What do I want to do? I've also added another special case fuel model. This one is for Chaparral. It was developed by Rothermel and Philpott back in '73, and it was modified by Jack Cohen for Firecast in the late '70s. And I worked with him right before his retirement to make sure that I got the best version of the model in Behave. It's designed specifically for Manzanita and for mixed Chaparral, and it was developed in California. But I have a feeling it's going to work fairly well in the Southwest as well. It allows more live fuel model classes, or live fuel moisture classes, which is going to expand the capability. So I'd really like to get feedback on how that model works for you as compared to the standard fuel models in Behave. Another thing that I added, and this was one that I added based on a fire that I had worked, is I changed one of the moisture categories. BehavePlus is dominated in the dead fuel moisture by the 1 hour fuel. And a lot of times that's the dead fuel moisture that you have the best information on. And so rather than pretending you have more than you do, sometimes it's just best to put that in and let the model handle the rest. But then you do have better information about the live herbaceous and the live woody category. And because of that, I've added this extra category here, allowing you to put in a single dead fuel moisture, but then split out the live herbaceous and live woody. And that's particularly important here in the Northern Rockies as we start the fire season, where the woody and the herbaceous fuels are definitely at different moisture contents. And now to the biggest change. This is the new way that we're doing directions in BehavePlus. This came out in the 90s, and doing some research on it, Pat Andrews started this before she retired, and then we finished it up after she retired, was to allow us to accurately account for fire spread from a fire perimeter as compared to fire spread from an ignition point. 99% of the time, you want to actually calculate directions from a fire perimeter. And if you can see on the screen, we have heading, flanking, and backing fire. Those three are special cases of the following directions from fire perimeter. Occasionally, however, if you have a spot or an ignition and you want to see if it's going to be going, is it going to affect this resource, then you might want to use directions from ignition point, so we left that in there. This will change your outputs for almost all of your prescribed fire planning, especially if you want to use the fire perimeter option. However, I do think it's going to open up more prescribed fire windows and more accurately reflect particularly flanking fire. So I think it's a good change, but it is a big change. So the way that it works, and we're going to give this a try here, is you have an ignition inside your perimeter, and we have then, I'll make this white, fire movement off of the perimeter, off of the ignition point and out to the perimeter. You can compare that then to fire spread off of the perimeter. So the old method of Behave was right there around the ignition point, modeling that, while the new one models that at the fire perimeter. When you're doing heading and backing fire, there's no difference in the outputs. The fire spread's the same. The difference comes in when you're doing flanking fire. Flanking fire from ignition point was just estimating the fire behavior to the edge of the ellipse. And flanking fire is actually defined as that fire behavior that's at the widest part of the ellipse mathematically. And so that's what made the difference in the change, is now with this heading, flanking, and backing option, we are modeling this fire at the perimeter itself. And that's going to generally increase the rate of spread, and then the flame lengths can either increase or decrease depending on the conditions that you've got. So that's what we're looking at with this here. And that's all of surface. The next module that we're going to look at is crown. I've added the Scott and Reinhardt crown fire model. This is the version that's used in Nexus, and that allows you to better relate what's happening in Behave to what's happening in the spatial systems, FLAMAP and Farsight, or WFDIS near term and short term. This allows you to really compare and say, why is the Scott and Reinhardt model doing what it's doing in this given area? And you can play with some of the parameters and see what's going on. So I've added that in. When you add that in, it brings in a whole nother series of outputs for passive crown fire. So the active crown fire is going to be the same whether you use Rothermel or Scott and Reinhardt. And the passive, which are grayed out in this screen, will be grayed out unless you choose Scott and Reinhardt, because that's the only time they're valid. The other thing I did was I reorganized the outputs to try to make them a little easier for folks to find what they need. So we have the basic, the fire type, getting the size projection for the crown fire, the canopy outputs, and the intermediate outputs. Just keep in mind that this is the crown fire model that was developed by Rothermel, and what Scott and Reinhardt did was then change that as it's moving, transitioning from a surface fire to a crown fire in that passive crowning module. That's where their differences are going to be between Rothermel, which assumes that it spreads at the rate of a surface fire, or Scott and Reinhardt, which actually increases that rate of spread to somewhere between the surface rate and the crown rate. I did remove the ability to calculate whether a fire would potentially be a wind-driven crown fire or not, and that means I also removed the power of the fire and power of the wind. Based on the recent research that they've done looking at extreme fire, this doesn't actually do the best job at calculating that, and so rather than misleading folks and about this calculation, we removed it from the program. So you're no longer going to be able to calculate that, but I'm not sure it ever gave us the answers that we really wanted anyway in terms of accuracy. So that was why I removed that one. In the contain module, if you remember from 490 or 590, when you do contain, it takes your resources and it basically splits them, and they build fire line up both sides of the fire. So if you have a dozer, it's actually split in half, and half of the fire line construction would be on each flank if you're going from the head or the rear. If you had multiple resources, what would happen was if your first resource could not catch the fire, then they would have no effective line growth until the second resource got there. And it was only once all the resources got on site that they would actually construct line that would consider to hold the fire. And we know that's not how it happens in the real world, and so Diane Trethaway here at the Fire Lab developed a modification for that that allows that original line to hold while we're waiting for other resources. So in essence, it's modeling the ability of your resources on scene to build line during the time that we're waiting for the other resources. And prior to that, the model did not allow you to do that. Spotting, there's just a couple of different things here. The spotting model, I've added a model that was developed for the Canadians for active crown fire. So this is we have spotting distance from torching trees, and now we have spotting distance from active crown. This is one of the last things that Frank Albini created before he passed away, and it works very well in Canada. The initial results that I've had from folks testing it here in the U.S. for me over the last couple of years say it works really well for them as well, so I'd love to get feedback on that one. And I also updated the species codes in this so that they match those from FOFM, and let me make sure I get this correct, from the NRCS plants database, so that everything's kind of using the same thing. If you have a spot model that you're bringing in from version 5, it will update to the correct species codes in version 6, but you'll always want to check that just to make sure that we got that right. The other thing I did, and this was again not only for 490 students, but also when I poll the F-bands at the workshop here, is how many folks remember that they need to divide the canopy cover downwind and the canopy height in half if the canopy downwind is considered open. I'll tell you that it's not that many, at least of the ones that I've polled, and I certainly don't remember it most of the time. So I added in a trigger that you put in whether the downwind canopy cover is open or closed, and then the model will automatically determine what needs to happen at that point. And that's just to help us all remember. It doesn't make a ton of difference all the time, but there are places where it does make a huge difference, and I wanted to make sure that they had the information they needed. In the mortality model, the biggest change was that we can now model mortality for longleaf pine based on some research out of the Southern Station in the Forest Service. That doesn't affect most of you here. but we did also update the species codes again to the NRCS plants database and FOFM, so all three systems are again uniform in how they identify these, at least until one of them changes. And as with the spotting model, if you import a version 5 run into version 6, it will import and correct the species for you. And again, that longleaf pine is a new specific pine mortality model. As models are developed around the country and as they're published and ready to go, Duncan Lutz with FOFM and I try to get them into our programs so that you guys have the best available science for you. The next thing I did was I removed the safety module. If you've been keeping up with the science at all, Brett Butler's group has really been working on updating safety zone size so that it includes convective as well as radiative heat and looks at both slope and wind. And below is, on the bottom of the chart, is just an example of the table. That's one I pulled from the website, and I'm not sure exactly what the latest is, so I simply said this was preliminary. Certainly something to follow on, but their science is way better than the one that was in Behave, so I removed it. And then they'll be creating an app that will, mobile app that will be able to go out and you'll be able to calculate it from there. So we're not getting rid of it, we're just moving it into a different platform. So the next question I wanted to ask is, how often do you use BehavePlus of any version? Is it weekly, monthly, occasionally, or, well, I've installed the program, but I haven't had a lot of time to look at it. So it looks like, as I suspected, most of you are occasional users. Few of you have installed the program and not used it, and definitely welcome to the club. Anything I can do to help you, let me know. And then we've got some weekly users. So you're going to be my power users, and hopefully you'll be able to give me some good feedback on how the program is working for you. Let's see, what do I have next? The next thing I wanted to do was go to the website and just point out a couple of tips for you. So let me see. Can you see my website?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So on the front page of the website, we'll have the latest news. In this case, it's that version 6 has been released as a beta. My contact information, as always, on the right-hand side as the development lead. However, we do have support provided by Fire and Aviation Management's Help Desk. So if you have any questions about the installation or where to get the program or anything like that, they're there for your first contact for that. But any other questions usually come on to me, and I'm happy to help you out the best I can. I will say, before you contact them, please check the known bugs document. I try to keep that updated if there's bugs I know about. If there's a workaround, I'll give it to you and also give you the status of it. The software page is the one where most people will want to go. I've listed BehavePlus version 5 is still the most recent, and it's the most official version. But BehavePlus 6 beta is out, so you can get both of those on this page. There's more information in the tables at the bottom, but the quick links at the top will get you straight to the install files for BehavePlus 5 and 6, as well as the fire characteristics chart. One of the biggest focuses that I have is on training, and I find that workshops are probably most effective, and I have quite a bit of information for workshops. If you want to hold one of your own, feel free to contact me, and I'm more than happy to share the information that we have. We have a number of different topics: prescribed fire, crown fire, surface fire, preparation for S490. We have a number of them. But beyond that, we also have a number of training materials available, and I'm updating those for BehavePlus 6. I think one of the biggest things that you'll want to look at as you transfer into using BehavePlus 6 is in the modeling unit, which is where we talk about all of the models that are in BehavePlus, the limitations and assumptions of those. That's where you're going to find the lessons on surface spread. And so this changing directions link here for surface fire spread, though there's 5 lessons in there. They're going to describe all the changes made with surface fire in far more detail than you probably ever want to know. So I would say that the first lesson provides an overview of all the changes, so that would be the one that you definitely want to use, and then you can decide among the other 4 if you need to dive deeper to really understand what's going on. Those are available for you as well. But definitely, please look at the first lesson. That gives you the overview of the directions changes and how you might best use them and what impacts they might have on your modeling capabilities. The last thing I wanted to point out was we do have all of the publications related to BehavePlus. Any of the models that we put in BehavePlus are published and in the literature somewhere, and so we provide links to all of them here on our publications page. And we also have historic publications about fire behavior and the old Behave, any number of things you can think about. But every specific module in Behave, I have something about the information of where those models came from, at least to the best that I can find. And I'm always looking for new resources to add. So if you have any suggestions, let me know. And we also have some historical fire fundamentals documents. The Southwest Research Station was really good at helping me get Clive Countryman's documents from the 70s so that I could get those copied and in here. And if you haven't seen them, they're great introductions to fire and fire fundamentals for those who may need it. And that was all I had on the website. I will say that on the home page, if you are interested, you can subscribe to BehavePlus News. And if you subscribe, that's going to take you to the Fire Lab page for all of our fire behavior systems, and you can sign up in the bottom right-hand corner for any number of the systems that come out. Wind Ninja, Fireworks, our fire danger, any of our fire behavior in general, and then also FEIS. So if there's anything that we can do to provide that information to you, that will come through those email lists as well. The next thing that I wanted to do is I need to stop sharing that and start sharing BehavePlus. And I just wanted to go through a couple of changes so that you could see them and what impact they make. So I'm going to go into my webinar, and I'm going to pick, we'll just do a heading only with an upslope wind. And this one is just the standard default run. And so if I calculate the run, looking at this for a fuel model 142, we notice at the top that it says this is for a head fire. And we know then that that heading option was selected. And then the surface rate of spread in this example ranges from 3 to 15 chains per hour, flame lengths from 3 to 6 feet. If I want to go in and see what the related backing fire would be with this, I have to go into the module selection, select the options, and in inputs under directions, this is where you find this, then you can go to the backing only. We had to split out heading, flanking, and backing because of the cutting-edge 1998 technology that underlies BehavePlus. We do want to create at some point a new system where we can put all of this in together, and that's in the works, but it's going to take a while to get there. In the meantime, we tried and broke the system irreparably when we tried to combine these 3 together, so we have to pick them separately. If you pick one of these 3, it does all of the math for you. So if you have a cross-slope wind and your fire is moving upslope or downslope, then you can actually, this will do all of the math for you as to where that direction of maximum spread is going to be. In this case, if I change it to a backing fire and then run the calculation, now up at the top it's going to say it's a backing fire, and our fire behavior is much less than it was before. Conversely, if you want to get if you need to get more complicated with things and you want to run more than one direction at a time, you can do that. And this is an example from one of the lessons that I created for directions using a TL3. This is a fire that was burning here in the Northern Rockies up in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. And I have the fire spread here, and it's heading, flanking, and backing fire. But because the direction of the wind was actually not upslope, I had to go in and calculate what that direction of maximum spread was. And I had to do that myself before I could set this up. If I had selected the heading only option, it would have figured that out for me. So there's benefits to that one. But if I calculate this run, it's going to tell me now that I have spread from fire perimeter. And then the thing that's most helpful, I think, in these is looking at the wind slope and fire directions diagrams. That really tells us what's going on. I'm not sure if you can see the teal arrow here. It's pretty light on my screen. But it is the same direction in this case as the direction of maximum spread, and that would be then the head fire. On the graph below it, the fire direction of maximum spread is still to the northwest, but to the left of upslope, but the flanking fire, or the fire direction that I'm calculating here, is to the right of upslope, and it's 90 degrees from the head fire. That's what makes it the flanking fire. So there are some benefits to doing this in that you can get really detailed in everything that you want to do. But when I spoke to the folks in West Virginia, they said they were going to try the heading, flanking, backing first, and that's certainly the easiest option. One more I wanted to show you, and that is the effect of the crown fire. And where did that one go? Okay. I think that's this one. That's this one. Okay. So this is from, we have a BehavePlus online course that we're prepping right now that will introduce folks to how to use Behave, prepping them for S490 as well as RX 301, 341. And this is one of the examples from that. In this case, I have the Rothermel crown fire model selected. So when I run this, then the outputs that I get, if I look at the crown fire rate of spread, which are on the next page, it ranges from 12 to 67 chains per hour depending on the wind speed. And that's the active crown fire rate of spread. And the crown fire type then is either torching or crowning. When I select Scott and Reinhardt, these crowning won't change. But in torching, that's what's going to change. We didn't want to determine what the rate of spread is that you should use, so there's help in the help system that can help you figure this out. But I'm going to go into crown, and I'm going to change this now to Scott and Reinhardt. And then if I look at my basic outputs, now my passive crown fire rate of spread is active, and I can click on that. And then if I go back and run this, I shouldn't need any additional information to run this one. Now I'm running the Scott and Reinhardt model. And now we have our passive crown fire, and you can see that that is in the torching situation less than the active crown fire. But it's the same as active crown fire in the actively crowning situation. And so that's how you can tell what's going on with that one. I think that's all I wanted to show in Behave. So are we back to the slides, Xander?
Yes.
Okay. So the main thing I wanted to end with is there's been a lot of changes that have gone into Behave. Nearly all of the modules have been affected. I tried hard to update all of the help so that you could follow along with what's happened in there. You have a list of changes that Xander has to send out to everyone. And I'm updating the lessons as I can in order to get them done. All of the introductory lessons are completed. The directions lessons are completed, and I finished the fuel moisture. I'm still working on a lot of the others right now. So those will come out, and you can follow along in the change log on the website to see the status of those. Right now, the beta release is available. I'm working to get it allowed in all of the federal agencies. The Forest Service doesn't have an issue there. You can install that elevated at any point. And the BLM, or the DOI agencies, in particular BLM, I'm working with them to get it installed. I haven't had any issues so far since it's beta, and once the final release comes out, then we'll have the official installation notice working through both agencies. So that will be coming down the road. At this point, are there any questions that anybody has? I know that was a really quick run-through of all the changes to Behave.
Yeah, you went through very quickly, but I thought it was clear, even not as a Behave user. So thank you, Faith Ann. That was a great presentation, and you also deserve some credit for using all the tools available to you, from the drawing to showing the actual software. So thank you for that as well. And I'd urge participants, go ahead and type in your questions. I will type in here. And oops, I misspelled something. And I guess we could try putting the phone line if people prefer to just verbalize their questions. I'll go ahead and give that a shot, and we'll see what sort of background noise there is. Well, it's relatively quiet, so participants are unmuted now. So if you want to just ask Faith Ann a question, you can feel free and say it out loud.
And Daniel asked about the handout. Xander, are you going to email that to everyone, or how's that going to work?
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll send that out to all the registrants. I don't think all the registrants were able to actually make it today. But yeah, so if you registered for the webinar, you'll get that email. That handout isn't online anywhere, is it yet, Faith Ann?
There's an older version of it on our website. I need to get the new version up. I just created that one yesterday for this webinar, and I'll work with the Frames folks to get it updated. But it'll be on the BehavePlus website as well.
Okay, great. But we'll set it out with a sort of follow-up with a link to the recording as well. So I have a question that I'm curious about. You mentioned that the change in some of the way the flanking fire is modeled, going from the widest part of the perimeter rather than just the ignition point, might change some prescribed fire planning. And just because I'm curious, I wondered if you'd be willing to indulge me and describe how that plays out.
Yeah, so let me go back to my drawing. And basically what happens is, looking at this, if I was going to model the fire behavior at this point where the ignition point reaches the perimeter, it would actually be heading off in this direction, which is not actually flanking, and that makes then the flame length would be lower. And so if you needed to have a certain minimum flame length in order to model the fire behavior to meet your burn prescription, then it would indicate that you wouldn't meet that, when in fact on the ground knowledge would know that you can. And so this new model that we're using actually models true flanking fire from the perimeter now. That's going to increase that flame length and probably bring you into prescription sooner in the modeling. So
neat. That's for me. That's a neat connection between the fire science and the modeling. And it looks like Tim Kirkpatrick has a question here. And Tim asks if there's any chance main fire and spots can be modeled together to project union of fires.
Oh, Tim, that's that fire-on-fire interaction. No, there is no current science that allows us to model fire-on-fire interaction or the union of fires like you're describing here. Mark Finney's group here at the Fire Lab is working hard to come up with a new fire model. And part of that fire model that they want to understand is this fire-on-fire interaction. And so if you're ever up here, I invite you to come and look at our burn chamber where they're doing the experiments, where they're actually experimenting with how this union of fires is going to look and what that might work in a model. So I would say that's coming in the future, but to my knowledge, there's no existing model that we can use to do that, which is very unfortunate, I will say.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, but I understand how it would be complicated. Other questions out there from the audience, whether you can verbalize them or type them in? Well, you may have done too good a job in detailing all the changes. People don't have enough questions for us.
Either that or I overwhelmed everybody and they don't know what I said.
Well, maybe it's worth reiterating as we kind of close out here, Faith, the next steps and the next releases. What's the calendar here going forward?
So the calendar going forward is we do not like to change versions of Behave in the middle of any major fire season. So January seems to be one of the best months for us to do it. Folks are, freshly getting back to work, and they might accept something new, and there doesn't seem to be a ton of fire activity. So in January, if I don't have any major bugs between now and then, that's the planned release date for the official version. We're already starting to work towards that. We've made a couple of bug changes in the last couple of months that as we found them and folks have reported them to me. So definitely if you're on the email list, you'll hear about those, and always check our website for the latest and greatest version. This will be the last update to Behave. Version 6 will be it, and after this, here at the lab, we're looking at what the next version of fire modeling will look like, and hopefully that will include the new fire modeling that's being developed downstairs. But at some point, we may have an interim program where we have the old science in the new model, but I cannot add any more to Behave without breaking it irreparably. The underlying infrastructure is too old and won't take it. So any further changes aren't going to happen, but we will do updates to any bugs or anything like that that we find along the way.
Great. Well, I think no point in keeping people on the line longer than need be. You did an excellent presentation. And as I say, we'll send out a recording and the handout that Faith Ann generated. And so I want to thank everybody for getting on the line and participating. And I hope you join us for future webinars. So thank you very much. And again, Faith Ann, thank you very much for your excellent presentation.
Okay, thank you. And feel free to contact me if you have questions.